My name is Rachel Miller. I'm 29 years old, living in Chicago. And if I had to choose one word to describe myself, it would be resilient. I wasn't born with connections or privilege. I carved my own path, even when it felt like the people closest to me were trying to break me. At a family dinner, my own mother smirked across the table and said, "No one will ever marry you. You're too cold, too obsessed with work." But months later, I stood in court, and the judge himself called me Mrs. CEO in front of everyone, including her. If you're watching this, please like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. Has someone close to you ever told you that? You'd never be enough? Did you prove them wrong? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to hear your story. It was a Sunday evening, the kind of night where family gathered at my parents' house for roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and tense conversations disguised as small talk. The dining room was warm with candlelight, laughter, and the clinking of silverware. My younger sister sat across from me, glowing as always, her charm the star of every gathering. My father listened, absent-mindedly, nodding at her stories, and then my mother turned her eyes on me, her gaze sharp, her smile thin. She tilted her head and said, "Rachel, you spend so much time working. Don't you ever think about what really matters? About marriage?" I forced a smile. "I think about building my future, Mom. About stability." She laughed, cruel, dismissive. "No man wants to marry a spreadsheet. No one will ever marry you." The words hit like a slap. The room fell silent for a heartbeat. Then awkward laughter followed. My sister smirked. Dad cleared his throat, but said nothing. And I, frozen, humiliated, just lowered my eyes to my plate. All through dessert, her words echoed in my head, bitter and sharp. "No one will ever marry you." I didn't even taste the pie. I smiled politely, nodded when spoken to, but inside, something cracked. Because it wasn't just an insult, it was confirmation of what I had always suspected. In my mother's eyes, I was never enough. After dinner, I excused myself and locked the bathroom door. My reflection stared back at me in the mirror, flushed cheeks, trembling lips, eyes brimming with tears. I whispered to myself, voice shaking, "Maybe she's right. Maybe no one will." The thought gutted me. For years, I had poured myself into my education, my career, my independence. I thought those things would make her proud. Instead, they became ammunition for her cruelty. But then, something shifted. As I stood there gripping the sink, I remembered a professor's words from years earlier. Leadership isn't about being liked. It's about being undeniable. The memory cut through the shame like a blade. I wiped my eyes, straightened my back, and whispered, this time with steel in my voice, "I'll prove her wrong." Not by begging for love, but by building a life so powerful, no one can dismiss me again. That was the night it all began, the night my mother's cruelty lit the fire in me. The path from humiliation at that dinner table to being called Mrs. CEO in a courtroom wasn't easy. It was paved with betrayal, isolation, sleepless nights, and moments I thought I'd break. But I didn't. And if you'll stay with me, I'll tell you exactly how a daughter dismissed as unmarriable became a woman who owned the title her mother could never erase. Because the truth is, her words didn't end me, they built me. And the revenge that followed? It silenced every cruel laugh at that table. People often imagine family dinners as warm and supportive. Parents asking about your week, siblings joking, a place where you feel safe. For me, it was the opposite. Dinner was the battlefield where my worth was put on trial. My mother adored my younger sister, Lauren. She was the golden child, blonde, bubbly, the kind of girl who could make friends in seconds. She wasn't a straight-A student, but she had charm, and that, in my mother's eyes, was worth more than anything. Then there was me. Quiet, focused, always with a book in my hand, always staying late to finish projects. My teachers praised me. My bosses admired my drive. But at home, none of it mattered. Mom would beam at Lauren's every little achievement. You made the cheer squad? Wonderful. You got invited to prom? You'll make such a beautiful bride one day. And when it came to me? Rachel, don't you think you're spending too much time working? My father wasn't cruel. He wasn't warm either. He existed somewhere in the background, reading the paper, nodding along, keeping his head down to avoid my mother's sharp tongue. Sometimes I wondered if he agreed with her, or if he was just too afraid to speak up. Either way, his silence hurt just as much as her words. Sunday dinners were sacred in our house. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, always the same meal, always the same performance. Mom would ask Lauren about her week. Lauren would chatter about dates, parties, and little triumphs. Mom would smile, hanging on every word. Then she'd turn to me, her expression already dimmed. Still working late, Rachel? Don't you ever get tired? Of chasing numbers, I'd nod, forcing a polite smile. Inside, I was screaming, this isn't just numbers. This is my dream. But saying it out loud never mattered. When I got a full scholarship to college, I expected pride. Instead, Mom sniffed. That's nice, but don't get too proud of yourself. Men don't like women who think they're smarter than everyone else. When Lauren got asked to the homecoming, Mom lit up the house with excitement. She even bought herself a new dress. That was the rhythm of my life. My wins dismissed, her wins celebrated. It wasn't just favoritism. It was erasure. I remember one dinner vividly. Lauren had just announced she was seeing someone new. Mom clapped her hands, thrilled, already talking about weddings. Then she turned to me, smirking. Rachel, you'll have to catch up eventually. Don't get left behind. I laughed awkwardly, stabbing at my food. But later that night, as I cleared the table, I overheard her mutter under her breath, just loud enough for Dad to hear, she'll die alone with her spreadsheets. He didn't argue. He just sighed, and that silence hurt more than the words. I started noticing how often she weaponized marriage against me. It wasn't just an insult, it was her favorite blade. If I wore a blazer instead of a dress, she'd say, that's why no one will ever marry you. If I worked late, she'd smirk. Your job won't keep you warm at night. It was constant, relentless, cutting deeper every time. And the worst part? Part of me believed her, but underneath her words, there was something else, something I didn't see clearly until much later. It wasn't just disdain. It was fear. Fear that my ambition might make me something she could never control, and that fear would grow into a war neither of us was ready for, because the night she humiliated me in front of the whole family, saying, no one will ever marry you, wasn't just cruelty. It was the moment she revealed how far she'd go to break me, and it was the moment I decided she never would. Looking back, the signs were always there. Little cracks in conversations, small betrayals disguised as jokes. At first, I brushed them off, but eventually I couldn't ignore them anymore. One evening, I was finishing up some work emails on my laptop in the living room. Mom glanced at me from across the couch, her voice dripping with disdain. Rachel, men don't like women who bury themselves in work. I sighed, trying to stay calm. Maybe I don't care what men like. Maybe I care about building something for myself, she smirked, sipping her tea. Building something for yourself won't keep you from being alone at 40. My throat tightened. Why does everything have to be about marriage? Her smile faded, replaced by a sharp edge. Because, Rachel, it's the only thing that matters. And you don't have it. That summer, we had a big barbecue in the backyard. Relatives filled the tables, kids running around while the adults chatted. I was excited to share that I'd been promoted to project lead at my firm, But before I could finish the story, Mom cut in. She works all the time. No wonder she doesn't have a boyfriend, she announced, laughing. A few relatives chuckled awkwardly. One uncle patted my arm, half joking. Better get on it before it's too late, Rachel. Heat flushed through me. I forced a tight smile, but inside, I was crumbling. Later that night, as I carried plates into the kitchen, I overheard Mom speaking to Aunt Denise. Don't expect grandchildren from Rachel. She'll be married to her laptop. Lauren will give us the family we need. Aunt Denise laughed. Well, at least you have one daughter who'll give you a wedding to look forward to. I froze in the doorway, plates trembling in my hands. They weren't just mocking me behind my back. They were rewriting who I was to the entire family. Even Lauren joined in. One night, we were getting ready for bed in our shared room. She smirked at me from her vanity mirror. You know, Mom's probably right. Guys don't go for girls who act like they're smarter than everyone, I whispered back, my voice trembling. I don't act smarter. I just want more than parties and boyfriends. She laughed, tossing her hair. Keep telling yourself that. I'll be the one walking down the aisle while you're buried in spreadsheets. Her words stung more than I wanted to admit, because a part of me feared she might be right. It wasn't just Mom. It wasn't just Lauren. It was uncles, aunts, cousins, people who had heard the same line so many times they started repeating. She's too cold. She's too ambitious. She'll never find someone. The narrative spread like wildfire, and I couldn't stop it. And the more I tried to prove myself, straight A's, promotions, achievements, the louder the whispers seemed to get. One afternoon, I left my laptop open on the dining table when I went to grab coffee. When I came back, Mom was standing over it, scrolling. Mom! I gasped, rushing forward. She didn't flinch. Just curious what you're always so busy with. I slammed it shut. You don't get to snoop through my work. Her lips curled into a smile. If it's so important, maybe it's because you're hiding the fact that you have nothing else in your life. Her tone was calm, but her eyes glinted with something else. Not just cruelty. Control. And in that moment, I realized she wasn't just mocking me. She was actively looking for ways to undermine me. And one day, she'd find the chance to do it in front of everyone. Graduation day was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life. 4 years of long nights, endless papers, juggling part-time jobs and internships. All of it had led to this moment. I'd walked across the stage, diploma in hand, my professors smiling, my classmates cheering. For a fleeting second, I thought maybe, just maybe, my family would finally see me. My parents threw a small party at the house. Relatives packed the living room, balloons tied to chairs, a sheet cake with my name in bright blue frosting. I walked in, beaming, still in my cap and gown. People clapped, congratulated me, and hugged me. For once, I felt visible. But then my mother raised her glass. She tapped her fork against the rim, smiling sweetly. Well, everyone, let's give a toast to Rachel for finally graduating. There was polite applause. I blushed, proud. Then she continued. Rachel, we're proud of you, of course. All those books and late nights finally paid off. But her tone shifted. Light. Mocking. But you know what I always say. Degrees won't keep you warm at night. And honestly, she looked around the room, chuckling. No one will ever marry you if you keep acting like such a robot. Laughter erupted. Some nervous, some genuine. My aunt snorted into her wine. Lauren smirked, covering her mouth as if to hide a laugh. My stomach dropped. Heat flooded my face. I froze in place, the plate of cake in my hands trembling. She had said it, out loud, in front of everyone. No one will ever marry you. The words I'd heard whispered in private had now become a public spectacle. I wanted to scream, to shout, to make her take it back, but my throat locked. So I stood there, humiliated, every eye on me. I mumbled something, maybe excuse me, and slipped away. I locked myself in the upstairs bathroom, clutching my diploma to my chest like a shield. Tears spilled hot and fast. My reflection blurred in the mirror. I whispered, voice trembling, "Why? Why would you do this to me?" But deep down, I already knew. Because in her eyes, my ambition was a flaw. My independence was a threat. And she wanted to make sure everyone else saw me as she did, unlovable. Downstairs, I heard laughter continue, plates clinking, the party resuming. My father's voice drifted up, steady, calm. Not once did he defend me. And that silence cut deeper than the insult itself. It confirmed what I'd feared. I was alone in this house. Later that night, after most relatives had left, I passed Lauren in the hallway. She leaned against the wall, arms crossed, a sly smile on her lips. "Don't take it so personally, Rachel. Mom's just telling the truth." Her words sliced through me like a knife. Back in my room, I curled into bed, diploma still in my arms. The pride I'd felt hours earlier was gone, shattered. All I heard was my mother's laughter, my family's chuckles, and Lauren's smirk. And in that darkness, the poison took root. Maybe they were right. Maybe I would die alone with my spreadsheets. But as the night dragged on, tears drying on my cheeks, another thought began to flicker. Quiet but sharp. If they think I'm unlovable, I'll prove I'm unstoppable. The house was quiet after the graduation party, but my mind wasn't. Even with the lights off and the guests gone, I still heard it. The laughter, the smirks, the clinking of glasses after my mother announced to a room full of people that no one would ever marry me. The words echoed in my skull, sharp and relentless, like a curse I couldn't shake. I sat on the floor beside my bed, diploma still in my lap. I ran my fingers over the embossed seal, but the pride it once gave me was gone. What good was it? What good were all the sleepless nights, the hard work, the sacrifices, if all anyone saw when they looked at me was someone unworthy of love? Tears burned my eyes. I pressed the diploma to my chest like it could protect me, but it couldn't. Not from her words, not from the silence that followed them. The next few days, no one spoke of it. Not my father, who kept his eyes buried in the newspaper. Not Lauren, who smirked whenever she passed me in the hallway. Not even Mom, who acted like nothing had happened, humming as she washed dishes. That silence was its own cruelty, because pretending it hadn't happened meant I was the only one still bleeding from it. At night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over. Her laugh, their silence, my sister's smirk. Each replay cut me deeper. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was too cold, too ambitious, too wrong. Maybe no one would ever see me as worthy of love. That thought wrapped around me like a chain. One night, I found myself sitting on the bathroom floor, knees pulled to my chest, tears soaking my shirt. I whispered into the empty air, my voice trembling. Maybe I am unlovable. Maybe I'll never be enough. The words tasted bitter, like poison. And yet, part of me believed them. But then, as I sat there drowning in her cruelty, a memory rose, clear, sharp, and unexpected. It was my professor, Dr. Harris, the day he handed back my senior project. He had looked me straight in the eye and said, "Rachel, leadership isn't about being liked. It's about being undeniable." Those words broke through the fog. Undeniable, not loved, not liked. Undeniable. I wiped my face, staring at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were red, my cheeks swollen from crying, but behind them, something flickered. A spark. Maybe I couldn't make my mother love me. Maybe I couldn't erase the humiliation of that night. But I could build a life so strong, so undeniable, that her words would lose their power. My voice steadied as I whispered to my reflection, I won't stay broken. Not for her. Not for anyone. I grabbed my journal from the nightstand, flipped to a blank page, and wrote in bold letters. She said no one will ever marry me. I'll prove I don't need marriage to be powerful. I'll prove I'm unstoppable. Line after line, I poured out my rage, my shame, my determination. And with every word, the chains loosened. By dawn, I was exhausted, hollow, but no longer hopeless. Because something new had taken root inside me. And soon, that seed of defiance would grow into a plan my mother would never see coming. Revenge didn't come to me in a single flash of brilliance. It came in pieces. Quiet, deliberate choices I made every day after that graduation party. I stopped waiting for my mother's approval. I stopped shrinking into silence. If she wanted to call me unlovable, fine. I'd build a life so undeniable that her words would choke her every time she repeated them. I started small. Every morning, I wrote in my journal, "Prove her wrong." It became my mantra, the fuel that carried me through exhaustion and doubt. I poured myself into my work with a fierceness that startled even me. I picked up side projects, networked at events, and volunteered for opportunities no one else wanted. Each yes I gave to hard work was a no to her voice in my head. But I knew ambition couldn't thrive in isolation. I reached out to professors who believed in me. I stayed late after networking events, talking to people who saw potential instead of flaws. Slowly, I built a circle of mentors and colleagues who encouraged me instead of tearing me down. One of them was Claire, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney who became more than a mentor. She became an ally. Over coffee one afternoon, I finally confessed what had happened at my graduation party. "My own mother," I whispered, my voice shaking. "She told everyone no one would ever marry me." Claire's eyes narrowed. "Then stop trying to be lovable to her. Be undeniable to the world." Her words hit me like a spark. With Claire's encouragement, I took the leap I'd been too afraid to take before, starting my own company. At first, it was just me and a laptop in my apartment. Long nights, cheap takeout, surviving on coffee and stubbornness. But slowly, contracts trickled in. Clients referred friends. I hired one assistant, then two. The little dream I'd once scribbled in notebooks grew into something real. Of course, my family didn't see it that way. At Sunday dinners, I'd mention a new client, and Mom would wave her hand. "That's nice, Rachel, but when are you bringing home someone special?" Lauren would smirk. "She's already married, to her laptop." The table laughed. I smiled politely, but inside I was already planning. They didn't know how big this would become. They didn't know that one day they'd eat those words in the most public way possible. Months later, my company was offered the chance to bid on a massive contract, a deal that would secure my place in the industry. The negotiations would take place in court, in front of a judge, investors, and the press. It was everything I had worked for, and I decided then, if I won, I would make sure my family was there to witness it, to hear the words Mrs. CEO announced in front of the very people who once laughed at me. I trained like a soldier before battle. I rehearsed pitches, memorized data, and refined my presentation until I could deliver it in my sleep. Claire pushed me harder than anyone ever had. "This isn't just about contracts, Rachel. This is about proving to yourself you're not who they say you are." I nodded, fire in my chest. One night, alone in my apartment, I stared at the glowing logo of my company on my laptop screen. I whispered to myself, voice steady this time. "She said no one will marry me, but she'll live to hear me called something greater." Mrs. CEO. The date was set. The invitations were sent. the courtroom would be filled with witnesses, investors, and, most importantly, my family. And when that day came, the woman my mother called unmarriable would rise in front of them all. Success didn't come overnight, but when it came, it arrived louder than I expected. My company wasn't just surviving, it was growing. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had a weapon sharper than my mother's words. It started with a small business magazine. They ran a story on young entrepreneurs to watch, and somehow my name was on the list. I still remember the cover, bright, glossy, my picture in a blazer, confident, professional. I left a copy on the kitchen counter that Sunday dinner, half hidden under the mail. Lauren spotted it first. "Wait, Rachel, is this you?" Mom glanced at the cover, her lips tightening. "That's nice." Dad murmured something about being impressed, but it was Lauren's smirk that stung less this time. It faltered. Because for once, I wasn't the butt of the joke. A few weeks later, we attended a cousin's wedding. Normally, events like that were torture, everyone fawning over dresses and husbands while I stood in the background. But this time, things were different. One of the guests, a colleague of the groom, spotted me across the room. "Rachel Miller? I read about your company. Incredible work." He shook my hand enthusiastically. Other guests turned to listen, nodding, asking questions. I caught sight of Mom in the corner, her smile frozen, her wine glass trembling slightly. For the first time, I wasn't invisible in family spaces. I was undeniable. Of course, Lauren couldn't let it slide. Back home, she leaned against my bedroom doorway. "Don't get cocky. Just because you're in some tiny magazine doesn't mean people care. You're still alone." Her words stung, but they didn't cut the way they used to. I looked her straight in the eye, calm, steady. "I'd rather be alone than be fake." Her smirk faltered again. She didn't have a comeback. The following Sunday dinner felt different. Normally, Mom dominated the conversation, lifting Lauren and tearing me down. But this time, relatives asked me questions. "How did you start your company?" "What's next for you?" I answered confidently, smiling. Mom tried to steer the conversation back. "Lauren's dating a doctor, you know." But the room wasn't listening. For the first time, her words weren't the loudest. Later that night, she cornered me in the kitchen. Her voice was low, furious. "Don't think a few contracts and articles make you better than your family." I met her glare, my voice calm. "I don't need to be better than you. I just need to be me." Her jaw clenched. For once, she had no comeback. That night, lying in bed, I replayed it all. The faltering smirks, the frozen smiles, the way relatives now asked me questions. It wasn't full revenge, not yet. But it was something. The balance of power was shifting. And as I drifted to sleep, one thought burned in my chest. If these small wins could rattle her this much, then what would happen when the judge finally said the words, "Mrs. CEO," in front of everyone? The day of the court hearing, the air in Chicago felt heavy, charged. It wasn't a criminal trial. It was a business proceeding, the final stage in securing a multi-million-dollar contract that would cement my company's place in the industry. But the courtroom still carried weight. Judges in robes, investors in tailored suits, reporters scribbling in notebooks. And in the gallery, my family. I walked into the courthouse in a navy blazer, heels clicking against the marble floor, my briefcase in hand. My team flanked me, confident, polished. I caught sight of my mother in the front row. Her lips curled into a smirk, like she was waiting for me to falter. Lauren whispered something in her ear, and they both chuckled. But inside, I wasn't the trembling girl from graduation anymore. I was fire contained in glass. The proceedings began. Contracts were presented, evidence submitted, arguments made. I stood when it was my turn, delivering my statement with steady confidence. I spoke about innovation, leadership, and the work my company had done to earn the contract. Every word carried the weight of years of sacrifice, the late nights, the humiliation, the whispered doubts. And when I finished, the courtroom was silent. The judge leaned forward, voice echoing in the chamber. After review, the court finds in favor of Rachel Miller, CEO of Miller Innovations. Congratulations, Mrs. CEO. Time slowed. Mrs. CEO. The title rang through the courtroom, bouncing off the walls, filling every corner of the space. I turned my head, locking eyes with my mother. Her smirk was gone. Her face was pale, lips parted in shock. The same mouth that once spat, "No one will ever marry you," had just been silenced by a judge declaring me Mrs. CEO in front of everyone. Investors applauded, my team beamed, reporters scribbled furiously. The sound washed over me like a tide, cleansing years of doubt. For the first time in my life, I didn't just feel seen, I felt undeniable. Lauren shifted uncomfortably in her seat, biting her lip. My father looked stunned, his eyes darting between me and the judge, as if he'd only just realized who his daughter really was. And my mother. My mother couldn't move. She sat frozen, as though the foundation of every cruel word she'd ever spoken had just cracked beneath her. When the hearing ended, cameras flashed as I walked out of the courtroom. My team surrounded me, congratulating me, shaking my hand. I could feel my family trailing behind, but I didn't look back. Not yet, because this moment wasn't about them. It was about me. Outside, reporters crowded the steps. "Rachel, how does it feel to win?" "What's next for Miller Innovations?" I answered calmly, smiling, every word polished. But inside, one thought pulsed like a drumbeat. She heard it. She can never take it back. Mrs. CEO. As I turned to leave, I finally glanced over my shoulder. My mother stood a few steps behind, her face a mask of fury and humiliation, her hand gripping the railing for balance. And I knew the fallout of today's victory was only just beginning. The victory at court should have felt like the end of the story. But victories don't erase years of wounds. They shine a spotlight on them. And under that light, my family couldn't hide anymore. We rode in silence after the hearing. I sat in the back seat, my blazer still sharp, my briefcase at my side. Mom's reflection glared at me from the rearview mirror, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. Finally, she muttered, "You didn't have to make a spectacle of it." I raised an eyebrow. "A spectacle? I won a contract. I was addressed as Mrs. CEO. That's not a spectacle. That's reality." Her lips pressed tight. Lauren fiddled with her phone, avoiding eye contact. Dad stayed quiet, as always. The silence was heavier than words. The following Sunday dinner was different. Usually, relatives ask Lauren about her latest date or new outfit. But this time, all eyes turned to me. "I saw the article about the contract," Aunt Denise said. "Incredible." Uncle Ron chimed in. "You've really made something of yourself, Rachel. Congratulations." I smiled politely, answering questions, telling stories. And through it all, I saw Mom's jaw tighten, her fork scraping too hard against her plate. Because the narrative she had spent years building, that I was cold, unlovable, destined to fail, was unraveling before her eyes. Later that night, she cornered me in the kitchen, voice low but sharp. "You know, Rachel, I only pushed you because I knew you'd be great. All those things I said, they were just to toughen you up." I laughed bitterly. "No, Mom, they weren't. They were meant to break me." Her face hardened. "Don't twist my intentions." I looked her dead in the eye. "I don't need to twist them. The evidence speaks for itself." She didn't reply. For the first time, she had no words. Lauren, usually smug and mocking, kept her distance. One evening, she passed me in the hallway, her tone softer than usual. "Guess you proved her wrong," she muttered. It wasn't praise, but it wasn't mockery either. It was acknowledgement. And somehow, That felt heavier than any insult she'd ever thrown at me. At night, alone in my apartment, I replayed the moment in court. The judge's voice, the applause, my mother's pale face. It was everything I thought I wanted. But sitting there in the quiet, I realized something. Revenge doesn't erase the pain. It doesn't rewrite the past. Her words still echoed in me. They always would. But now, they didn't define me. Because for the first time, I understood. Her cruelty wasn't about me. It was about her own fear. As I stared at my reflection in the window, city lights flickering around me, I asked myself the question I had been avoiding. Do I need her apology? Or do I just need to let go? The answer wasn't clear yet, but I knew the decision was coming. Because revenge had given me victory. But resolution would come from me, not from her. And I was finally ready to choose my own ending. The weeks after the court victory felt different. For the first time, the weight I had carried since childhood, the constant need to prove myself to my mother, started to slip off my shoulders. Because the truth was simple. I didn't need her validation anymore. At our next Sunday dinner, Mom tried again. Mom. She asked if I was seeing anyone, her voice sharp as ever, but her eyes darted nervously around the table. This time, I didn't shrink. I didn't force a smile or swallow my words. I set my fork down and said calmly, "Whether I'm married or not doesn't define me. I define myself. And that's enough." The room went silent. For once, she had nothing to say. A month later, my company hosted a gala to celebrate the new contract. Investors, employees, and partners filled the hall. Laughter and music echoed through the space. As I stood at the podium, I looked out at my team, the people who believed in me, who had built this dream with me. Tonight isn't just about a company, I told them. It's about proving that no one else's definition of you matters. What matters is how you define yourself. Applause erupted. Cameras flashed. And I felt it. The freedom I had been chasing all my life. That night, I realized something important. Revenge had been the fuel, but empowerment was the destination. My mother's words no longer stung. They no longer echoed as chains around my neck. They were just words, and I had built a life that made them meaningless. When I hear her voice in my head now, sneering, "No one will ever marry you," I answer back with the truth. Maybe not, but I became Mrs. CEO, and that was always more than enough. I wasn't unlovable. I wasn't broken. I was unstoppable. Some scars don't fade, some words will always linger, but scars don't make you weak. They remind you of what you've survived. My mother tried to break me with her cruelty. Instead, she built my fire. And that fire carried me to a place where her approval no longer mattered. If this story touched you, please like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. Tell me, if a parent told you you'd never be enough, would you fight to prove them wrong? Or would you walk away forever? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. Because sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't proving them wrong. It's proving yourself right.